There was a time when censorship meant a man with scissors in a newspaper office. He would slice out words that offended the empire. Today, censorship doesn't wear a uniform, it wears an algorithm. Your post disappears, your account is shadowed banned, your reach collapses quietly, mathematically, in the name of community guidelines. No one orders you to shut up. You just keep stop speaking. And behind that algorithm stands not one tyrant, but two, the state and the silicon oligarchy. One claims to protect national security, the other, community standards. Both decide what's visible. The question is simple, but dangerous. Who governs the digital republic? Our constitution or corporations that never stood for election? Act 1 is about the founding idea, freedom as the first republic. When India wrote its constitution, it wasn't writing in peace. It was writing from memory of prison cells, censorship, sedition. British India had criminalized dissent. Newspapers like Kesari and the Hindu were seized. Bal Gangadhar Tilak was jailed for exciting disaffection. Freedom itself was a crime. So when Article 19 1A was born, it wasn't just a right, it was revenge against silence. Dr. Ambedkar called it the foundation of democracy. Without it, he said the republic would be a shell without a soul. But the ink hadn't dried before freedom began to shrink. Within a year, the First Amendment of 1951 inserted reasonable restrictions. Why? Because in cases like Ramesh Thapar versus State of Madras and Brij Bhushan versus State of Delhi, the Supreme Court had struck down government bans on journals. The Nehru government panicked, not because it hated freedom, but because it feared it. So began India's peculiar paradox. We declared liberty sacred and then fenced it with exceptions. Free speech in India was never absolute. It was licensed liberty. Freedom that needed a permit. And from those and that day to this, the state has perfected the art of controlling speech legally. Act 2 is about from free press to platform, the digital revolution. The press once needed printing presses, editors, and advertisers. Then came the internet and it broke the hierarchy. Every citizen became a publisher. Every post a headline. Every phone a printing press. That sacred power. To regulate the new voice, the state built the Information Technology Act 2000. It sounded technical, but Section 66A turned into the bluntest weapon. It criminalized sending messages that were grossly offensive or annoying. Think about it. Who decides what's annoying? In Shreya Singhal versus Union of India 2015, the Supreme Court struck it down, calling it vague and unconstitutional. Justice Nariman warned that such a law chills the freedom of speech. Yet, years later, people were still being arrested under the same section because it hadn't been scrubbed from the police manuals. What this showed was brutal truth. The state doesn't need to officially silence you. It just needs to create fear that you might be silenced. Act 3 of this lecture is about the tech giants entering the courtroom. Now a new player entered that arena. The tech giants. Facebook, YouTube, Twitter. They promised connection, community, freedom, but freedom soon became filtered. Remember 2021, the farmer protest. Twitter blocked hundreds of accounts critical of the government citing legal orders. Platforms claimed they were neutral, yet their silence spoke volumes. They obeyed political directives faster than they followed public ethics. Around the same time, India passed the IT Rules 2021, creating new intermediaries, compliance officers, grievance officers, and gave the government power to trace originators of messages. They could now legally demand to know who said what, when, and to whom. Then came the fact-checking units, a bureaucratic body answerable to the executive, deciding what information about the government was false. No court, no review, no debate. This isn't democracy. It's digital feudalism, a world where speech isn't banned, it's filtered. The algorithm doesn't burn books, it buries them. Act 4 of this lecture is about the Constitution meets the code. Let's get into the legal DNA. Article 19 1A grants every citizen the right to freedom of speech and expression. Article 19, subclause 2, allows reasonable restrictions. Now combine that with modern technology. You get the perfect constitutional loophole. Take the Anirudh Bhasin versus Union of India 2020 case about internet shutdowns in Kashmir. The court said, yes, internet access is a part of free speech, but then it allowed temporary restrictions for security reasons. That temporary shutdown lasted months. In Fahima Shireen versus State of Kerala 2019 case, the High Court said internet access was tied to education and privacy, but again, only within reasonable limits. In every major judgment, you will find the same structure, a recognition of freedom, followed by its quiet funeral. Now insert tech corporations into this constitutional frame, and the results are even more complex. Governments outsource censorship to platforms. Platforms hide behind terms of service. The result: a new kind of law, invisible, unaccountable, global. Ambedkar once said democracy in India is a top dressing on an undemocratic soil. Today, free speech is a digital top dressing under code written in California and approved in Delhi. Let's get something straight. Censorship in the 21st century doesn't announce itself. It doesn't come wrapped in barbed wire, it comes wrapped in procedure. It's filed in triplicate. It's for your safety. It's reasonable. And that word, reasonable, has done more to shrink liberty than any dictatorhood. First part of Act 5 is the shift from blunt repression to polite control. Earlier, repression was visible, a ban, an arrest, a newspaper raid. Now it's coded into compliance. You post a video critical of the government policy. You don't get arrested. Your reach is throttled. Your monetization is paused. Your content violates guidelines. You appeal, but the guidelines are written by an unseen global team who answer to nobody. What this does is subtle. It doesn't stop you from speaking. It disciplines you into obedience. Next is the legal mask. The state realized long ago that outright censorship invites backlash. So it learned to bury control inside law to make censorship look like governance. Take the Digital Personal Data Protection Act 2023. It claims to protect you from privacy, to protect your privacy, but then quietly exempts any government agency from its safeguards if it acts in the interest of sovereignty and integrity. In plain English, privacy for citizens, immunity for the state. That's not privacy, that's privilege. Next is the return of licensing Raj in digital clothing. The new Broadcast Services Regulation Bill is perhaps the most audacious example. It proposes that every content creator, OTT platform, or streaming service must register under a licensing framework, with the government holding oversight powers. You have seen this movie before, right? In the 1950s, the Indian press fought tooth and nail against the Press Objectionable Matter Act and the Cinematograph Act because they placed speech under a licensing officer's mercy. Now, 70 years later, the same colonial logic returns, except this time it's dressed in digital robes. Licensing in the digital era means control by access. You don't need to ban the journalist, you just don't approve his license renewal. Now, let's discuss the fact checking trap. Let's talk about something that sounds harmless: fact checking. Who could oppose facts? But here's the trick: when the government becomes the fact checker, it becomes the final editor of reality. The Press Information Bureau's proposed fact-checking unit gives itself the right to declare any information about the government as false and compel social media platforms to remove it. No hearing, no trial, no judge. Just a bureaucrat with an email ID who can erase an opinion, a headline, or a question. This isn't governance. This is truth by notification. Next is the judicial silence and bureaucratic convenience. You might think the courts will stop this, but courts intervene only after damage is done. In Sharia Singhal, the Supreme Court struck down Section 66A. But for years after, citizens kept getting arrested under it because police manuals still carried the section. This tells you something profound. When the state's instinct is to control speech, a judicial victory becomes symbolic, not structural. Law is only as alive as the culture enforcing it. And Our administrative culture remains colonial at its core. Next is the international pattern. Now, don't think this is uniquely Indian. The same pattern runs across the globe. In the United States, the Twitter files revealed how intelligence agencies coordinated with platforms to suppress certain political narratives under the label of misinformation. In Europe, the Digital Services Act mandates platforms to remove harmful content, a term elastic enough to include dissent. China has state censorship, the West has corporate censorship. India now experiments with hybrid censorship, where both merge under legal formalities. The next to discuss is the new bureaucracy of speech. Modern censorship doesn't need censors, it needs compliance officers. YouTube has regional head of public policy. Twitter, now X, has a nodal grievance officer. Facebook has escalation teams. These aren't creators or citizens, they are speech managers. And in that structure lies the quiet colonization of the Indian mind, where your national sovereignty is now administered by private employees in California or Singapore. Next is the psychological dimension. The most dangerous effect isn't legal, it's psychological. The citizen begins to self edit. He asked himself before posting, will this be taken down? Will I get a notice? Will I lose my job? And that's when censorship succeeds completely. When people stop needing to be told what not to say. That's how democracies decay, not by decree but by discipline. Next is the quiet revolution of fear, which we will discuss now. Every time a law expands the state's discretion over speech, fear trickles down. A comedian hesitates, a student deletes a tweet, a journalist softens a headline. The public square remains, but the public spirit retreats. This is the new emergency. Constitutional, compliant, and polite. A modern republic where no one is technically gagged, yet no one truly speaks. Censorship today is not a blackout, it's a dimmer switch. The lights are on, but only just enough to see what they want you to see. And that's far more dangerous than darkness. The next act of the chapter is who governs the digital republic? Let's step back and ask the constitutional question. Who really rules the digital republic? Our constitution, our parliament, or something, and someone else. The first part of it is the algorithmic sovereign. The modern governor isn't a person, it's a protocol. An algorithm decides what's visible, who trends, and who and what gets buried under digital noise. And that algorithm is privately owned, protected by proprietary secrecy. You can challenge a law, but you can't challenge a line of code. That's the real shift from constitutional sovereignty to algorithmic sovereignty. And with this, we need to discuss the invisible cabinet. Platforms hold more power than most ministers. Facebook can influence elections, YouTube can shape public discourse, and X can tilt sentiment overnight. Yet, they operate like private states with their own laws, which are called community guidelines, their own police, content moderators, and their own courts, which are appeal system. We live inside these digital territories, but without citizenship rights. We are data subjects, not citizens. Now let's discuss the government cooperation nexus. Here's the irony. Governments complained about big tech, yet use it as their tool. In 2021, the Indian government asked Twitter to block journalists and activists during protest. In 2023, Twitter revealed that it complied under legal pressure. In the US, both Republican and Democrat administrations leaned on social media to flag misinformation. In the EU, the Digital Services Act makes platforms liable for illegal or harmful content, effectively forcing them to over-censor to stay compliant. So both the state and the corporations are not adversaries, they are partners in managing public perception. Now let's discuss the death of neutrality. Tech companies love to say they are neutral, but neutrality in power systems is an illusion. The algorithm is a moral code. Every design choice, what is to amplify, what to hide is an ethical and political act. By pretending to be neutral, platforms have created a form of governance that's immune to accountability. If a government censors, you can vote it out. If a company censors, you can't even find out why. Now let's discuss the economic incentive behind control. And here's what most people miss: censorship is profitable. Engagement thrives on outrage. Algorithms push polarizing content because it keeps you scrolling. Government exploit that same outrage to consolidate narratives. So the system doesn't seek truth, it seeks attention. And whoever controls attention controls democracy. That's not an accident, that's the business model. Next to discuss is the citizen's dilemma. We are living in an age where your digital identity is more permanent than your physical one. But you have fewer rights online than offline. If the government seizes your property, you can go to court. If YouTube deletes your channel, your only appeal is to support ticket to an AI bot. That's not republic, that's a digital empire. And that leads us to the difference between constitutional sovereignty versus algorithmic sovereignty. Constitutional sovereignty means the citizen is supreme, the state is accountable. Algorithmic sovereignty means the system is supreme and the citizen is optimized. The state and the big tech now co-rule this empire. One writes the law, the other enforces it through data, and in that merger, democracy dissolves. The constitution governs people, the algorithm governs behavior. And behavior, mind it, is easier to control than belief. Now let's look into the forward way, reclaiming the digital republic. So the answer to this isn't abandoning technology, it's constitutionalizing it. We need a bill of digital rights, one that recognizes algorithmic transparency, data sovereignty, and free digital expression as a constitutional essentials. Courts must treat algorithmic opacity as constitutional opacity. Parliament must legislate not to control speech but to decentralize it. Tech literacy must become civic literacy. Because in the next decade, knowing how algorithms shape your thought will be as vital as knowing your rights under Article 19. Every generation must fight for freedom in its own language. Ours isn't the language of pamphlets or protests. It's the language of code and connectivity. Ambedkar fought for constitutional morality. Our fight is for digital morality, to make machines answerable to man, not the other way around. If we lose that, we won't lose freedom to tyranny. We will lose it to convenience, and that's the cruelest loss of all. When people stop demanding rights because the illusion of comfort feels like liberty. So who governs the digital republic? Not the parliament, not the courts, not the people. It's governed by the convergence of code and control, a machine that speaks in the state's voice and thinks in corporate language. But that machine still runs on human obedience, and the moment we stop obeying, it collapses. When free speech dies, it never leaves a corpse, it leaves silence. And silence, my friends, is the loudest proof of control. This is the next hearing where we don't just interpret the law, we interrogate power. This is Amod Bidhuri. Thank you for watching.